Welcome to the Women at the Top podcast interview series. My name is Regina Barr, and I'm the founder of the Women at the Top Network, and I will be your host today. For those of you who don't know us, Women at the Top is a community of like-minded women who share the WAT vision and mission. And our goal, simply put, is to empower aspiring women to lead. And we do this in a couple of ways, by providing information, training, and connections. Joining me today is Jan Lehman, author of Work Smart, Do More, the CEO's Guide for Optimizing Time, Talent, and Tech to Create a Winning Culture. Before we get started, let me tell you just a little bit about Jan. Jan is an accomplished technology executive who created and led highly effective teams with Fortune 500 companies. She's an international speaker and a globally recognized productivity expert. She's been featured in Forbes, Business Journal, and Entrepreneur. She's a best-selling author, and her book, Work Smart, Do More, is a #1 new release in workplace culture and leadership, as well as a top seller in time management. Jan is passionate about integrating the tools that she's developed into the fabric of your company's culture to create positive, lasting change. Her proprietary approach blends behavioral strategy with technology solutions to help leaders improve work culture by harnessing the power of productivity in their lives, work, and companies. On that note, welcome to our program today, Jan.
Thank you, Regina. You have such a great voice. I love it.
Thank you. So we're going to get started with the backstory. And for those that have been with me over the years, you know I love to hear the backstory from our guest about their book. And so, Jan, I'd love to know what inspired you to write this particular book.
Yeah, so I think there was a little bit of me that thought it'd be pretty cool to say I was an author. I got to be honest. The second reason is just like you, Regina, I'm a speaker. And I was noticing that some of the really big speakers were often authors. And I would notice that they was considered to have a lot more credibility because they were an author, which I always thought was kind of funny, because to be a good writer doesn't mean you're a good speaker. But I get the concept. You probably are a thought leader. You have unique thought. And so that was a big driver for wanting to publish a book. I would say the biggest one, though, that was the most important is when I would ever try to explain to people what I did and what I would try to explain what a productivity consultant did, I just didn't do a very good job. I got to be honest. And so I would notice that if I was speaking to an audience and they would sit through an hour-long presentation and hear my ideas, they would get it. They'd start to understand what the heck I do. And they would come up to me afterwards and they'd make comments like, wow, you're really approachable. And it got my wheels turning. And I realized, I don't know, productivity consultants maybe were scary, rigid people. I don't know. But it made me realize, how do I get in front of more people and let them understand the ideas that I have and get to know my personality and that I'm not scary? And so the book was really the perfect strategy. And so if you've read the book, you'll know the book's very much in a conversation style. The goal of the book is at the very end that you hopefully know me, trust me, think I have great ideas, and you like me and you want to hire me. That's the overall goal.
That's awesome. I'm just chuckling when you mentioned that people didn't perhaps understand what you do. I have been in business for 20 years and I think my husband still doesn't understand what I do. So maybe I need to write a book so that he'll know what I do and be better able to explain that to people. So just a thought,
Love it. Love it.
Gotta love the hubby there. So your company, CDC Productivity, the CTC stands for Create the Culture. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so my goal is not to help just individuals be productive in a company. I mean, it's certainly the end goal, but what we are finding is that individuals cannot be truly productive unless everybody around them is working in a productive way because of interruptions and lots of different things. So that's when we realized we have to actually start at the tippy top and get leaders to embrace the ideas, role model the ideas, empower everybody, and start that trickle effect down through the organization. And that's how organizations would really see true productivity in the organization. So we call it creating a culture of productivity is really what we always say. So CTC productivity. And that's really the storyline for the book. It's about one of my amazing leaders that embraced the ideas and was willing to be vulnerable and role model and do things a little bit differently and embrace the ideas. And it's a great story about the importance of his role in the whole journey.
That's great. because it does truly start at the top. It's hard to ask people to do things if you're not willing to do them yourself.
Mhm,
So coming out of the pandemic, I think the focus for a lot of people, business executives included, has
mhm,
shifted. And
mhm,
I just had a coffee with someone and we were talking about this exact topic. And employees are wanting more work-life balance and they want to do work that's more meaningful.
mhm.
We all, you and I, and probably most of the people who are watching or listening in today spend a lot of time at work or thinking about work, right? Even when we're not there.
Yeah.
So I think we all need to find more joy in the workplace. So, how can organizational leaders help employees put the joy back into their work?
Yeah, such a good question. And I feel very blessed. I'm on my second career and I loved what I did before, but I'm now in the swim lane doing exactly what I love with coaching and speaking. And so I feel very, very blessed by that. So where we help with it is our ultimate goal is to help people get time back in their day. And the whole idea with that, and then the really the storyline around the book is work smart, do more. And the do more is do more of whatever it is that you want, right? So if you're an entrepreneur and you want more time back in your day to grow your business, great. That's going to bring you joy. You do that. If you have a small family, young family, and you want to get out of work earlier, be more efficient so you can get home and be with your kids, excellent. That's what we're striving to do as well. There's kind of a cute little thing in the book. A lot of people don't notice, but if you look at the book, there's a little on the return key, there's a smiley face. And the whole idea there is if you work smart and do more, what's actually going to happen is joy. What we're finding is there is really a really tight linkage between productivity and employee engagement, job satisfaction. In fact, we do metrics. How we figured this out is we do metrics with everything we do. So after a coaching engagement, after a training session, we'll send out a 1-minute survey and it has 4 questions. The 2 are quantitative and 2 are qualitative. The first quantitative is, do you have time back in your day? And on average, I'm happy to report we deliver a 10% bump in productivity if you're a willing and interested participant and you're applying our ideas. And so that's like giving somebody a month back in their year. So it's pretty good. Second question is, if you're in a revenue generating role, what are you doing with that time? Are you increasing revenue? Or if you're in a cost savings role, are you decreasing costs? But I have to say it's the 2 qualitative questions that really started getting our attention because of the real big bumps that we were seeing there. So the 2 qualitative questions are your job satisfaction going up and is your stress going down? And I just last month had somebody fill out the survey and they said their job satisfaction had gone up 31%. That's huge. And then a couple of years ago, right when we had started doing this survey, we had 2 high potential employees from 2 different companies go through the coaching. And I thought I was doing a good job. They were showing up for the next coaching call. But it wasn't until they filled out the survey that I saw the results. And they both said that the job satisfaction had gone up between 81 to 100%. And I called both of them and I said, I'm so sorry. Our survey must not have been very clear. And they both said, no, I'm not kidding. I was really starting to resent my job. I had to work every weekend. Now I have time back in my day and I can get home and do what I want to do. I'm so much happier. So I love that we're talking about this because it's such an important byproduct of driving efficiency across the company.
Well, first of all, I'm happy to see that you're bringing more joy and helping people bring more joy to the workplace. But the second thing that I liked is the fact that this has some quantitative measures and
Mhm,
subjective measures,
mhm.
because I'm an ROI gal, return on
Yay.
investment.
That's good.
And I think that's how a lot of organizations operate. If they see the return, they're willing to make the investment. And so,
Mhm,
I think it's just so important that people understand that this
mhm,
has far-reaching impact. It's not just about getting more time in your schedule or doing more.
mhm,
It's that it has all of these other pieces that, I always tell people energy begets energy, right? So if you're doing things that help energize you and less of the things that don't energize you, or if you can work through them more quickly, it's a
mhm.
win-win. So.
Yeah, agreed.
Now, you've been working with leaders that are looking for proven successful ways to increase productivity. And we just talked about measures, right?
Mhm,
Which I think most leaders do look for. We like the subjective, but I tend to think a lot of business leaders look for the quantitative. What are
mhm,
you hoping happens after they read the book? I mean, we just talked a lot about joy.
mhm.
What else do you hope happens for them?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping they're going to do everything that we're talking about, which is that they're looking at this from a win-win-win perspective, right? Like a win for the organization, a win for the client, a win for their employees. And they're going to do exactly what we're talking about, which is embrace the ideas, role model them, which is super critical, because if these leaders don't role model them, people aren't going to be able to feel empowered to do them. And then honestly, I'm hoping they hire me to help them on that journey along the way.
So let's just, we're talking about what you're hoping happens when they read the book. You've talked with a lot of leaders. What are some of the productivity issues that they're facing and that their teams are facing? And
Mhm.
are they the same or different for both those groups? Is it the same? Are their teams experiencing the same things that they're experiencing, or is there a difference?
I would say that they're experiencing a lot of the things the same. The difference is the leaders are the one that can change it. Obviously, that's going to make a big difference. Um, I personally feel like we're in if I had the authority to declare an epidemic, I would declare an epidemic right now. I would say 80% of the businesses we go into, everybody is just busy. They are not at all productive. So people have back-to-back meetings, they're bouncing from one thing to the other, they're not planning. And it's just a highly reactionary environment. And it's really hard, back to the ROI, it's really hard to measure wasted time, which is why we started approaching it from a different angle. And really, in my opinion, everybody has it really backwards. It's going at a slower pace. It's more white space on your calendar. It's not cramming a million things in that truly drive productivity. So
I think that's great advice about the white space, because I think we all operate in this environment where we think we just have to cram more and more in. And,
yeah.
sometimes you need to schedule in that white space and
Mhm.
name it something so that you don't feel guilty about having it on your calendar, because you
Yep.
do need time to have a little downtime. You need time to think, you need time to process what you're learning and hearing in meetings, and you
Yeah.
need some time to get things done. It shouldn't have to be that you're getting the to-do list done at night, or as some of your colleagues and employees, excuse me, clients, I'm looking for the word clients, are doing it on the weekends, right? We need to do work during work time so that we can have downtime during our personal time. So I think all of that is great. And that white space, I think, is critical.
Mhm.
Now, you've talked with lots of leaders in your
Mhm.
training, in your conversations, when you're writing your book, all these things. What do
Mhm.
you think some of the assumptions that these leaders are making about their employees that may be incorrect, particularly when it's coming to looking at their productivity?
Mhm.
What can they do, probably more importantly, to help correct those assumptions?
Yeah, this one, I love this conversation. Anytime I'm coaching a leader or speaking to leaders, I always bring up this angle, because one of the big assumptions we see is leaders will often assume people think the way they think, work the way they work, have the same knowledge they have about how to be productive. And that's a huge miss for leaders. And the other thing that I see is I'll often find my leaders will say, well, I told that person they should be a better planner, and they're just not getting any better. And so they don't actually get into the weeds and ask questions about, well, how do you plan? They just assume people know what they need to do. So definitely leaders really, one, we need to start raising awareness for leaders that they're aware of this blind spot. And then two, you can't just lob over the fence. You need to be a better delegator. You got to get in there and say, how do you delegate now? What's that look like? Ask some questions. And if you're not in the mood to dive in and figure it out, then hand them my book. And, and in the book are lots of strategies in the weeds and the tactics on how to be a better planner, be a better delegator, all those kind of things. But that's a big miss for a lot of leaders. And usually I love it when I raise that, because they'll be like, oh, that makes sense. I can see that. So it's good.
Mhm. Well, behaviorally, we're all wired differently.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes leaders fail to take that into account when they're sort of evaluating employees and things like that.
Mhm.
It's something that I think is really important for leaders to understand. So I'm glad that you do take the time to call that out in the book, and also to call it out with leaders, because the old days, if you think about HR, right? The old days, we fixed weaknesses, right? In the new days, we leverage strengths. So
Mhm.
my strength, if it's not planning, then we need to help, right, that person figure out how to either elevate that to some degree or find other resources to help that person. So I'm glad that you have those kinds of conversations, or at least remind people to have those conversations,
Mhm.
because I think it's so critical. And, when you talk about earlier, one of your clients saying that they were really starting to resent their job. Well, if we make people do more of what de-energizes them or is not their core
Mhm.
strength or gift, by golly, they're certainly going to resent their job. So if we can figure out how to free them up from some of that, number one, it will increase the productivity, and two, that job satisfaction. So I'm glad that that's a big part of the process for not
Mhm.
only what you're doing, but what you're talking about in the book.
Yay, thanks.
So let's talk a little bit about productivity tools and tactics. You
Mhm.
talk about those in your book,
Mhm.
and a lot of times the folks that are either listening in or watching, they're looking for quick and easy things that they can
Mhm.
do. I call them quick hits, things that
Yep.
they can implement quickly and easily. So when you think about the tools and techniques and tricks and tips and things that you work with, what's the easiest productivity hack for some of our listeners or viewers to implement?
Yeah, this is a good question, and this might scare people, but one of the smartest things you can do and easiest things you can do is turning off all of the notifications, all the bells and whistles, the popping up. Because when you're deep in thought and you get an email notification or a chat message pop up and you go and you look at it, and even if you don't respond to that person, your brain was interrupted and you shifted and your executive functioning moved to another place and then had to come back. So you absolutely have to backtrack. So we always recommend that you do what we call interruptions on your terms, which is stay focused on what you're doing. And when you come up for breath, that's the perfect time to check and see what's going on in the world and shift your priorities and your focus. I read an article, Regina, a couple of weeks ago, and it was really frightening about how many times a day we pick up our phone to look at notifications, what's going on. And it was over 300 times a day. I mean, it's just frightening. So the simple act of learning how to turn off notifications on all your bells and whistles, the only notification that makes sense to pop up is a time sensitive notification, like you have a meeting in 15 minutes, wrap up. That makes perfect sense. But otherwise, when you come up for breath, you're going to triage and look and see what's going on in the world. The only caveat that needs to happen there to make people feel comfortable turning off the notifications is if everybody around them understands that if it's truly time sensitive and every minute counts, then I know that they're going to call me on my phone because we're going to pick up a call. So when you have that, again, that's getting into the team productivity. You have to have this understanding within the team that someone will call me if it's that time sensitive and it's okay for me to shut down the world. So I love that hack.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about something other. You talked about turning off notifications. So that's the practical tip. But
Mhm.
you also said some other things that I call operating rules of the road. And
Yes.
it's having that agreement
Mhm.
with either, if it's team members, if you're an organization, if you're a small business owner, with your clients, how you're going to operate and work together.
Mhm.
So I think turning off notifications for those that, fell out of their chair when you said it, uh, can work if you've had that communication. Maybe it's even with your spouse. A lot of people are texting and doing all these things, and then, or their kids. And
Yeah.
it's sort of like setting an expectation, which I had to do way back in the day when I first started my company. I had to retrain people that when I went into my office and closed the door, I'm working.
Yes.
That means in those days, it was, I'm not going to pick up the phone every time you call,
Mhm.
but I will call you back on my lunch hour, right? Which is kind of what you're saying. Like when you're in your focus time, you're not going to allow all those distractions, and you're going to turn off
Yes.
the things that are popping up. And then when you have that time, I don't recall what you called that time, where you're allowing yourself then to shift your focus, then that's when you would be doing your follow-ups and your calls. Now, obviously, I'll tell you, I was in a meeting earlier and my mom called and I didn't shut off my phone, and I
Mhm.
happened to turn and look at it. What people may not know is my mom almost never calls me. I'm the driver of the calls. So as soon as I saw that, I knew it was a red flag for me, right?
Yep.
And I needed to as soon as I was done with that meeting. And if she called again, then I would interrupt the meeting,
Yeah,
because for me, that's usually something mission critical is going on. So
perfect.
anyway,
Mhm.
so love that, turn off the
Mhm.
notifications. Now, ironically, and it wasn't necessarily by design, but I'm focusing on productivity this month. So that's been my theme. And I actually wrote a blog called Claw Back Your Time by Taming Digital Chaos, in
Yep.
which I talk about ways to manage emails with the goal of freeing up some time. And I have to tell you, I have been doing a lot of work to clean up my inbox. I
Yay.
got behind, yes. And then also unsubscribing. I'm at
Mhm.
about 60 newsletters, which I can't even believe I was getting 60 newsletters. But when they come in and you delete, and you just, to me, that's mind clutter. And I just decided I'm getting rid of the mind clutter. So, can you share a few tools and techniques for managing emails and that digital chaos that you've learned over the course
Yeah.
of your professional and your consulting career? So, we
Yeah.
we want to get the behind the scenes on this.
Well, kudos to you for taking the time to do it, because any tool you use daily, you should use it highly efficiently, right? So, it's interesting about email. We actually spend a lot of time helping companies leverage the newer technologies, Microsoft 365, Teams, SharePoint. And but I would say we still have a significant amount of time we're coming in and just teaching Outlook to companies. And it's sad because a lot of there's be so many aha moments there. And I just keep thinking to myself, you could have known these things 25 years ago. So anyway, but Outlook training is still, excuse me, Outlook or Gmail or whatever email tool you're using is still a really important training strategy for every company. So what we find is that a lot of people have heard about little features. So they've heard about like block sender or rules or conversation mode and all that, but they don't often think about, but how am I supposed to really manage my email? Like, are there different strategies for managing? And so that's where we often start the conversation. And we talk about the fact that there's, in essence, three different ways you can manage your inbox. There could be the zero inbox folks, who purists, who their goal is really to zero out their inbox every day. So they treat their inbox very much like how we treat our mailbox on the curb outside our house. It's a receptacle to receive, and that's it. And then they move it along to a different way of tracking that task. Then there's using your inbox like a to-do list, which is where we find most people have success. And that is that the only things that are in your inbox are things you still need to do something with. I still need to read that newsletter, or I still need to respond to that person. And then there's a vast majority of people, those are the folks that are in the thousands of emails in their inbox, that are using their inbox like what we would call a reference file. So what we mean by that is there's still to-dos in there, but there's a lot of emails in there they may want to refer to at a later time. There's not a to-do behind them, but they want to keep it front and center so they can find it. And so we talk about those different strategies, and email is a really personal tool, and everybody should do the right approach that makes sense for them. But again, we mostly see people having more success using their inbox as a to-do list. So if you want to do that, there's a couple of strategies we recommend. One is you have to understand how to use advanced search. A lot of people know basic search, but they don't know advanced search. So if you understand all the bells and whistles on how to search, and you can narrow the search results down to a really small list, you don't have to organize everything in these finite little folders. You can actually use what we call a catch-all folder, which is a big old fat folder where you put about 80% of your emails, knowing you're going to be able to search and find it. Now, there's a time and a place for a specific folder, but most people have tons of folders, but we no longer have time to file our email to that level of organization. And so they just end up with the clutter building up in their inbox. So all of those strategies really have made a world of difference. Again, I sort of giggle that I have so many people tell me, just last month, I had 2 attorneys say that was a game changer for them. And I just wanted to say, oh, I could have taught you that 20 years ago. So
Isn't that amazing? I mean,
yeah.
I'm a big fan of Outlook. I do Microsoft 365, but I use the
Yay.
Outlook app on my desktop.
Mhm.
It's so funny because I never even really knew it was called an app on my desktop. I just assumed that Outlook was, the front end, and that's how it looked for everyone. No, because some people are actually going directly to the site. I just prefer to have it come in and have it look
Mhm.
the way I like it to look. So, but
Yep.
I'm cracking up. So if you had to just guess, what percentage of the population are zero in their inbox, those purists?
It's a really small percentage. So we play a little bit of a game and when I do a presentation, and I love it. It's super fun. I have people stay standing based on how many emails they have in their inbox. And
Yes.
it's super fun. And I always say that the last person standing is not necessarily the most unproductive. And I mean it very sincerely. Email is a very personal tool. And
Mhm.
so how you manage email, if it's working for you, don't go changing. But it's really enlightening to see that. And there's typically only probably 1 to 5% of the group that might sit down when I say, do you have only like 50 emails in your inbox? This is interesting,
Okay.
Regina, going back to like assumptions. I did have a leader one time that was a zero inbox person, and she wanted to mandate everybody in the company be zero inbox. Again, that's a major miss. She
Yeah.
assumed everybody could be as disciplined as her. And so, yeah, zero inbox is a really small percentage.
Yes. Well, I just chuckled. I'm not a zero inbox person. And I would also tell you, I guarantee that executive might also have had uh, somebody assisting them with some of those non-essential emails too, which most of us don't. Even I work with an executive assistant, but I manage my day-to-day inbox. She manages sort of the general company or
Mhm.
more that general informational inbox where we get inquiries too. So kind of interesting and fun. And, you know, just hearing the different styles on that and how to kind of manage that. So we are actually winding down on our time together. But before we go, I would love to know if you have just one piece of advice that you could offer to our viewers or listeners today
Mhm.
that if they didn't do anything else but this one thing that would help them improve their productivity.
So I was thinking of a different angle. I was thinking more targeting leaders and the one thing for them to do. And so the idea would be take these ideas back to your organization, to your teams, and start a conversation and figure out what the people around you think is going to be the most important productivity strategy or hack to help the whole teams work together. And then in particular with that is also look at this as a long game. How do you build these concepts and ideas into your culture long term? So building it into performance reviews, building it into your onboarding where you say, the word emergency in our company means this and expected response time to emails is 24 hours or whatever it can be. So don't limit the conversation to just some hacks we're going to implement. Think about how you make it part of your culture long term would be the biggest piece of advice I would give to a lot of the leaders out there, formally and informal leaders, because many of us are informal leaders.
Agree. That's great advice. So
Yeah.
start the conversation, share some of the tips. So
Mhm.
that does conclude our interview with Jan Lehman today. Just a reminder, you can learn more about Jan at www.ctcproductivity.com. So
Mhm.
thank you again for being here today, Jan. We do appreciate your time.
Thank
And don't forget to visit reginabarr.com where you can learn more about upcoming podcasts and other events on our events page. So with that, thank you all for joining us today and have a wonderful day.